Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are around the world. We greet you tonight from sunny South Carolina. I'm here with John C. Farrell, and look at his name. It actually says John C. Farrell. So I am so excited about that. How are you this evening, John C. Farrell?
I'm fine. I'm not actually in South Carolina. I'm in North Carolina. So it's,
We
it's
are
sunny here
here
too.
from the sunny Carolinas because
Yes.
he's on the north side of the border and I'm on the south side.
Yes, I'm doing well. Doing remarkably well. So I got a nice supper in my belly and ready to talk
In my
whatever we're going to talk
belly.
about.
In my belly.
Yeah.
Well, it has been another remarkable week in the Middle East. And as we are going live with this broadcast, the news has just recently been released that there is a tentative ceasefire between Israel and Hamas that was brokered by the Egyptians, which is very interesting.
Huh.
Now, as we all know, Egypt and Israel have a peace treaty. And so it is somewhat significant that Egypt had brokered this treaty. Now, not all of the Arab nations were light-handed with Hamas. It was very interesting. Yemen basically said Yemen was part of the Abraham Accords that were the peace accords that were brought together by President Trump. And so Morocco and Yemen and a couple other Arab nations signed these, what they call the Arab Accords, or not Arab, the Abraham Accords, because they're all children of Abraham. And so they're coming together as cousins and Semitic brothers. And so Yemen last week came out and said to Hamas, if you don't stop your firing these missiles at Israel, we will not invest the money we promised to invest in Gaza.
Money
And
speaks.
so they
Money
put some
talks.
pressure. Yeah, they put some pressure on them. So at any rate, we'll see how this holds and what happens. But as of right now, it appears that there will be a peace treaty.
Wow. So Craig, what was the cause of the current conflict?
Well, the that goes back to Isaac and or not Isaac, but it goes back to Jacob and Esau. When it comes right down to it, I shouldn't say Jacob and Esau. I should say Isaac and his brother Hagar's son Ishmael, which Ishmael is the father of the Arabs and Isaac is the father under Abraham of the Jewish nation. So there's been conflict from 4,000 years ago all the way down to today. But what occurred in this current situation is that Mahmoud Abbas, who is the president of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the Palestinian Authority there in Israel and Palestine, he has been growing weaker in over the years. Now, he had taken control after the death of Yasser Arafat, and he was elected president. But there was an election that was due just last week, or a couple weeks ago, and Abbas canceled the election because he believed that he wouldn't win. Well, Hamas was waiting for this opportunity, and they launched these missiles at Israel in large measure to show the other Palestinian Arabs that they were and are the stronger party, because they want to lead all of the Palestinian people. Right now, you have Hamas, which is a terrorist organization that is based in Gaza, but it also has a political wing. And then you have the Fatwa party in the West Bank that is led by Abbas. And they are the ones that are in power there in Palestine. And so this is part of the ongoing struggle. And it's very clear that Hamas has been planning this for a long time. It has been 7 years since the last time that Hamas has shot rockets into Israel. And when they did that 7 years ago, Israel went into Gaza, and you may remember that they found all these tunnels where the terrorists were moving their supplies, equipment, and they actually had tunneled under the border into Israel. And so Israel started taking out those tunnels 7 years ago. In the meantime, they built a concrete wall across the southern border underground in Israel so that Hamas could not tunnel under the border anymore. So this was an unmitigated attack. Israel had done nothing to Hamas to cause them. They had been trying to live in peace. They had been allowing humanitarian aid into Israel, and Hamas just unleashed these missiles, 4,000 plus missiles, into Israel. And one of the things that's important to recognize here is that these missiles have no guidance on them. They just launch them, and they hope they
go willy-nilly,
blow something up. Whereas the Israeli...
It's kind of scary, because I imagine there's probably a lot of collateral damage. But I guess when you're firing them, you're not really concerned with...
Well, here's the other thing that's so tragic is that these are low-end technology. And so some of these missiles misfire and have actually dropped in Gaza and killed their own people.
Oh, wow.
So fortunately, Israel, along with the United States, over the last 20 years, has built this technology called the Iron Dome. And it is computer GPS-guided missiles that go after missiles that are shot into Israel. Imagine what would have happened if they didn't have the Iron Dome and 4,000 rockets fell into the nation of Israel. It would have been thousands of wounded people, thousands of dead, and Israel would have been forced to unleash a ground war against Hamas. And so now, while Israel has attacked areas where they knew that Hamas was located, they've kept the deaths to a minimum. They've attacked military targets for the most part. Well, they've attacked military targets, but there's always going to be civilians, because Hamas, as a terrorist organization, plants itself in residential neighborhoods and in buildings where there are civilians. So, for example, everybody saw on the news, or many people saw on the news, Israel target the high-rise building in Gaza and bring it down. Well, first of all, the IDF contacted everyone in that building, reached out to everyone and said, get out. We are going to be destroying this building because we know that Hamas has terror headquarters in this building. And so they gave people plenty of time to get out, and then they bombed the building. But the amazing thing that has been discovered is that the Associated Press had an office in that building, which raises a lot of eyebrows with regard to, is the Associated Press being fair in the Middle East if they are putting their offices in the same building as a known terrorist organization? Something is very wrong there. And once again, the modern media wonders why so many people don't trust them. Here's another example of why we don't trust you. It's not, you're not being fair-minded. You're not truly being journalistic. You're being propaganda, and you're being used as a tool. So at any rate, we're very happy to hear that there is a ceasefire, and we hope that it will last. But we also know that Hamas is not going to stop in its plans to try to destroy Israel. Israel, I watched Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed several ambassadors from throughout that region and some in Europe. And he said, we have three choices. One is to try to make peace, but we know that Hamas will not make peace. They want us destroyed. So 2 is to just be a deterrent to their actions, which is what we've been doing. He said the third choice is one that we reserve, and that is what the United States and England had to do in World War II against the Nazis and against the militaristic Japanese. And that is that when London was bombed, the British had to retaliate by flattening cities in Germany. And when the U.S. Suffered all of those terrible casualties there in Okinawa, it responded by flattening cities in Japan. Now, that was an all-out full war, World War II. That was a war to the death, and the call was made by Churchill and by Roosevelt for unconditional surrender of both the Germans and the Japanese. Israel does not want to take those kind of measures, but if they are pressed, they will take those measures because they're a nation and they have the right to defend and protect their people.
Right. Well, before I go into my next question for you, Kelly Williams Duncan says hi to both us, to you and myself. And then Laura Lynn Gambino says, praying for the peace and safety of Israel. Absolutely.
Amen. Amen.
So,
well, greetings to you both. And I did want to follow up on our conversation from last week, excuse me, with a few stats. Last week, we were talking about the difference between Israel and the surrounding Arab and Muslim nations. And I had pointed out that the Arab nations go from Morocco on the Atlantic coast and the Mediterranean all across northern Africa into the Middle East, all the way up to the border of Turkey. Turkey, of course, is a different people group, the Turks. But Syria are Arabs, Iraq are Arabs. And then it goes over into the border of Iraq and Saudi Arabia with the border of Iran. Iran is a different people group. They're the Persians. But then it goes south all the way down to Yemen and the United Arab Emirates right there along the Persian Gulf. All of that encompasses Arab land. It's probably about the size of the United States, and it makes up 22 Arab nations. Then if you expand to all Muslim nations, you move up into all the former Muslim countries that were on the south side of the Soviet Union, like Turkmenistan and Afghanistan, and all of those different Arab, or not Arab, but Muslim republics. You go over into Afghanistan, you go into Pakistan, which used to be a part of India. You go into a large part of India. You can go down into Indonesia. You could go into China. You could go in, as I said, into India. All of that encompasses primarily Muslim lands, or in the case of China and India, lands that have a large Muslim population, hundreds of millions of people, right? And I contrast that with the land of Israel. And John, you remember from last week, how large is the nation of Israel, modern Israel?
It's the size of the state of New Jersey.
Exactly. And the jihadists and many of the liberals here in the United States want Israel to give up the land that it goes back into antiquity, that Jews have been in since antiquity, and it's the size of New Jersey. So I did a little bit of more research, again, to follow up from our conversation last week. And so if you go all the way back to the time that Abraham, the father of both the Jews and the Arabs, moved from what was Iraq at the time, or Ur of the Chaldeans is what it's called in the Bible, across the Fertile Crescent and into Israel, that would be 4,000 years ago, when Abraham entered the promised land, which was called Canaan and which became Eretz Israel. And there have been Jews living in the promised land in Eretz Israel ever since that time. Now, King David established the nation of Israel in Jerusalem in 1003 BCE. And so that has been more than 3,000 years since the nation of Israel was established. It was established a little bit before that with King Saul, but King David was the one who moved into Jerusalem and conquered Jerusalem and made it the capital of the Jews. So the Jews have had their capital in Israel, other than the time where the Romans kicked them out for 2,000 years, for the last 3,000 years. So you have a people that are one of the oldest people groups and nations in the country. So do you want to take a guess, John? And there's some disagreement on which is the oldest, but which nation do you think is the oldest nation?
The Chinese.
No, it is the Egyptians.
Oh,
and
yeah, that makes sense.
Some sources have them being a nation as far back as 6,000 years, which is amazing. So you think about when Abraham went down into Egypt with Sarah, Egypt would have already been 2,000 years old at that time, if that is the case. So some of the other leading ancient countries, you mentioned China, but I was surprised to find that Iran was probably number 2 in age next to Egypt. So the ancient Persians, then Vietnam is older than China, although there are some people who say that China is older than Vietnam. And we don't really know, and different groups have different definitions of what constitutes the beginning of a nation. And
I was going to ask you, what defines how old something is, because I guess it's in certain ways, it's very subjective, I would assume.
Yeah, I think that primarily the historians and archaeologists hang the number on a certain event that shows nationhood emerging, because, there could have been a lot of tribes, there could have been city-states, but a nation emerging usually is some sort of an event, whether it be a defeat of one army over another, or it be like in the case of Israel, biblically, it was the anointing of Saul as king by Samuel. But in terms of the actual kind of the gravitas of it, it probably would be more David establishing the capital in Jerusalem, which was the second kingdom. So some of the other countries include.
So it's kind of equating the start of America to 1776, because even though we had people over in America or United States before it was United States, obviously, that lived over here before then, it wasn't really considered a country or a people until 1776, when we became American.
July 2nd, 1776.
Right.
Now you say, wait a second, I thought it was July 4th.
Yeah, that's when
actually John Adams believed that we should have had our birthday on July 2nd, because that was when
the first signature was, right?
That's when they voted on the thing, and then they signed it on July 4th. So the vote had already taken place.
But didn't the last signature not come for a couple months or a couple weeks?
I believe so. Yeah. Okay. But the majority of them signed it the day that John Hancock put his giant signature on it. So some of the other nations that are of that old ilk would include North Korea, as I mentioned, Armenia, India, Georgia, which I was really surprised, 1300 BC, right around the same time as Israel's founding, and Sudan, Ethiopia, and Greece. So quite a collection of nations, and it gives some perspective. We would never ask Egypt or China or Vietnam to give up their land, and yet why are we asking the Jews to give up land? The propaganda is that there were no Jews for 2,000 years. That's simply not true. There were Jews in Eretz Israel the entire time. It's just it was a small group of Jews, and many of them lived in Jerusalem and upheld the Jewish Orthodox faith in Jerusalem. And so they were there when the Romans kicked the Jews out in AD 70, and then after the Bar Kokhba revolt, and they were there when the British came in and pushed out the Turks and took over, and they were there in 1948, obviously, or 1947, when the UN voted for partition in 1948, when David Ben-Gurion stood up in the Tel Aviv Museum in May of 1948 and declared that after 2,000 years, that Israel would be reborn.
Nice. Well, so going back to the current conflict, so many people are blaming Israel and calling them a colonial power and an apartheid state. Is that true? And to what degree is that true, if it has any truth at all?
Neither of those statements are at all true.
Okay.
That is leftist propaganda. It's anti-Semitic, and people need to face this. It's ironic to me that the left, politically, quite often are very pro First Nations, Native people. They want to restore rights and land and property to Native people, except for the Jews, which makes me think, why is that? And nobody can answer that. I believe it's spiritual, but needless to say, it is the big hypocrisy that they are pro-natives except for the native Jews, because they, for whatever reason. So the left, not only in America, but mostly around the world, and jihadists and Muslims, they will say that Israel came in and took away the land from the Palestinian people. Well, first of all, there has never been a nation called Palestine, ever. It has never existed. There was a state that was called Palestine in the Ottoman Empire, and the majority of the people who lived in that state were Arabs. However, there were also Turks, there were also Jews, there were also Christians and Westerners. So it was a mix of people. So in no way was it an Arab country. It was a Turkish Ottoman state, like Pennsylvania is a state in the United States. Palestine was a state in the Ottoman Empire. The only time it had been a nation was when the Jews were there and the Romans pushed them out.
But what time period was the Ottoman Empire I'm not 100% sure. I know. I kind of have a rough estimate.
The 1500s through the 1900s.
Okay.
And they were destroyed because they allied themselves with the Germans in World War I, and the British, that gave the British the right to go in to fight against the Ottoman Empire, the Turks, in Palestine. And the British pushed the Turks out and defeated them, and the British took over control of Palestine from the Turks, and they remained in control of Palestine until Israel rose up to declare itself a nation.
Okay. So what is the connection between the current president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, Yasser Arafat, and the former Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin Husseini?
Well, these are the three most recent leaders of the Palestinian Arabs. And so let me finish up what we were talking about first, and then we'll go to this question. So what had happened is that, as I pointed out last week, in the 1890s, the Tsar of Russia was assassinated. And one of the assassins was Jewish, a Jewish woman. And so in retribution, the Russian government unleashed pogroms against the Jews. And there were more Jews in Russia than anywhere else in the world. And it was a bloody, bloody mess. And so you'd say, well, what was a pogrom? If you ever saw the movie Fiddler on the Roof, where the Russian soldiers come in and break up the wedding, and then they set fire and they beat people, that's a pogrom. And some of them were light, like that one, and others they killed and tortured and raped and stole and burnt down synagogues and homes. And so it just depended, but it was all state sponsored. these were not just a bunch of angry Russians doing this. This was the government persecuting the Jews. And so when this happened in the 1880s, the intelligentsia of Russian Jews said, we've had enough. And so that was the birth of the Zionist movement, where they said, we have been traipsing across the globe without a country and without protection for long enough. And that is why there was the Spanish Inquisition, and hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed or wounded or pushed out of Spain. That was why there were the pogroms in Russia. That is why the King of England pushed the Jews out of England. That is why in France there was the persecution against the Jews at the turn of the century, where they had raised false charges against an assimilated Jew called Captain Dreyfus. And they brought these charges against him saying that he was a traitor, and they found him guilty on very flimsy evidence. And when they were publicly tearing his medals and his insignia off, the crowd started out saying, "Death to Dreyfus, death to Dreyfus." And then all of a sudden they started chanting, "Death to the Jews, death to the Jews." And there was a reporter, a Jewish reporter in the crowd named Theodor Herzl. And his eyes were open for the first time. And he realized that there was no assimilating, there was no blending in for the Jews. Here you had this captain who had served France loyally and was a loyal French subject. But just because he was Jewish, they turned on him, they lied about him, and they stripped off all of these medals, and they sent him to prison on Devil's Island, yelling as he was getting on the boat, "Death to the Jews, death to Dreyfus, death to the Jews." And so across the Jewish world, the eyes were opened that if we don't do something, we're going to be wiped out. We must go back to our home. Now, here's the thing. From AD 70 all the way up to the 1880s and all the way beyond to 1948, during Passover, Seder, every year, around the world, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of Jews would end the Seder by saying, "Next year in Jerusalem." Every year. Mm-hmm. See, you could take the Jew out of Jerusalem, but you couldn't take Jerusalem out of the Jew. They were God's chosen people, and this was the land God promised to them. That was a covenant, and the Bible says in Deuteronomy that it is an everlasting covenant. This was one of the scriptures that actually influenced President Harry S. Truman. He read this passage in Deuteronomy. Among the thousands of other things he considered, one of them was this scripture that said God has given the promised land to Israel as an everlasting covenant. And that touched his heart. But what also touched his heart was that 6 million Jews had been murdered by the Nazis in Europe. So what had happened? All these Jews were starting to go back to their homeland, but Hitler hated them and the Nazis hated them. And sadly, this throughout Europe and really throughout the world, there was hatred for the Jews. And some of it was political. Some of it was financial, because God had blessed the Jewish people and they did well financially. There was jealousy. Some of it was hatred because they were different in their customs, in their religion, in the way they carried themselves. And some of it, I believe, was just spiritual, because God said, "These are my chosen people," and Satan hates that. And those who don't love and serve God hate that.
And that's exactly what Marlene says in her comments. She says, as you said, this conflict is spiritual. It may be playing out in this world, but the root in the battle is definitely spiritual, from as far back as Abraham's son, Ishmael, and Isaac.
Which I said earlier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So what happened is that now the nations of the world were embarrassed that 6 million Jews had been trapped and had been annihilated by the Nazis. And it actually was the first time that the world looked with sympathy. Not everybody, because of course, as we've said, the Muslim nations, the Arab nations, they would never vote, at least not back then, for the nation of Israel in Palestine. But many of the other nations of the world had, because of the Holocaust, had sympathy for the Jewish people. And so what had happened is that the British, who had been the mandate power after World War I, meaning that the League of Nations had given Britain the mandate to help raise up two nations, actually. They were raising up a Jewish nation and an Arab nation. And what happened is that the Jews took it very seriously, and they started to build their own nation. So there were basically three governments happening in Palestine between World War I and World War II. One was British, the mandate, one was Arab, and one was Jewish. But the Arabs didn't really take it seriously, and the Jews took it very seriously. So when the British felt the world's condemnation on how they had been handling Palestine, because they had become very unfair. And it basically was clear that the British said, we really kind of like being here. It's a good halfway point between England and India. So we like to be here. And it's right next to the Suez Canal, which we can protect and keep open. So we're kind of going to change our mind on our promise called the Balfour Declaration to give Palestine to the Jews. Well, that backfired big time on them, which I talk about in my book, I Am Cyrus, Harry S. Truman and the Rebirth of Israel. And so the British said, well, we'll throw this into the new United Nations and let them vote on it. And they thought for sure the United Nations would vote for them. But again, that backfired on them. And the United Nations in November of 1947, in part because of pressure placed on certain countries who were on the fence by President Truman, the United Nations voted in November of 1947 for partition, meaning one Arab nation and one Jewish nation. And the Jews accepted and the Arabs did not. And so to this day, there is a Jewish nation, Israel, but there is no Arab nation because they never accepted it, because in the jihadist mindset and in the fundamentalist view of the Quran, as I pointed out last week, their teaching is that whenever Islam conquers a land, it becomes Islamic land forever. So they could not accept there being a Jewish nation in a land that was conquered by Saladin and the Mamluks and the Turks, which were all Muslim empires. And so they said, we have to have it all or nothing. And so the Jews said, well, okay. And so they moved in, they built their nation, and that's what we have to this day.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for the explanation. I was not aware of that. So going back to the question that I had asked previously, so what is the connection between the current president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, Yasser Arafat, and former Grand Mufti of Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin Husseini?
So these are the three leaders of the Palestinians in what used to be called Palestine. Right. Before that, it was called Eretz Israel, what is now called Israel. Mm-hmm. And so the Grand Mufti was appointed by the British. Now, he had been a bit of a rogue, and fellow Palestinian Arabs, many of them didn't like him. And the last vote that took place before the British came in, he came in fourth place for this political office in Jerusalem that he had run in. Oh, wow. But what had happened is that the British had named one of the competing Arab families, a member of that family, as the mayor there in Jerusalem. And so to balance it out, they thought, well, we'll give Haj Husseini the Grand Mufti, which was a spiritual and advisory type of position. And it was one of the worst decisions that the British ever made. And the the strange irony of that is that the first commissioner over the British mandate was a Jewish man named Samuel. And he was the one who gave all this power to Haj Amin al-Husseini. And it ended up being a terrible mistake, because Husseini not only ended up fighting against the Jews and wanting to annihilate the Jews, but he also turned on the British. And eventually the British tried to catch him and to execute him. He was brought up on charges and was found guilty. And he escaped at one time to Iraq, and they went after him in Iraq. Then he escaped to Lebanon. Then he escaped to Egypt. And finally, and you're going to be amazed at this, John, but Husseini, during World War II, moved to Berlin. And he was placed into the home of a wealthy Jew who had been killed in the Holocaust. And he was giving money from the money that had been confiscated by the Jews. And the Nazis considered him to be, they called him the Führer of the Middle East.
And so he was doing this, and he was doing this all from a Jewish guy's house in Berlin
with
wow.
Murdered Jews' money. Yeah. And so this is Yasser Arafat's uncle. And Yasser Arafat was raised by this man and by other relatives who have the same jihadist viewpoints. Now, there are some who would say, well, Arafat moderated over time. But I think that the key understanding, and by the way, when the Germans lost, when the Nazis lost World War II, Husseini ran for his life. And there were different tribunals, like the Nuremberg type tribunals, that were trying to get him and to, put him on trial. And he escaped to Egypt and was protected by President Nasser in Egypt. And then even Nasser got sick of him and kicked him out. And so he ended up in Lebanon, and he stirred up all kinds of trouble in Lebanon. And if you remember, in the 1970s and 80s, there was this ongoing war between the Israelis and the Lebanese. And a lot of that was stirred up by Husseini, who died in the late 1970s. And so Yasser Arafat learned from Husseini, and he said, I have the greatest respect for my uncle, and I would like to follow in his footsteps. So you have to judge by his own words. Right. And then really the telltale moments, a lot of liberals thought, oh, well, Yasser Arafat, he's mended his ways, and he wants peace, and he wants to live side by side with the Israelis. But when President Bill Clinton brought together Prime Minister Barack and Yasser Arafat for the Oslo peace accords, Barack and the Israelis offered an unbelievable peace deal for the Palestinians, where basically they gave them half the country and said, you can have your own nation, an Arab nation, a second state in Palestine, and we will live side by side in peace. One would have thought, and I even thought, he's going to have to accept this amazing offer. And he said no. That says so much. And anybody who is willing to look at this fairly and without political eyeglasses will have to say, why? Because it's all or nothing in that fundamentalist jihadist viewpoint.
Mindset, yeah.
So then when Yasser Arafat died, Abbas became president. He ended up winning in the elections and has been president ever since. And yet now he's losing his appeal. He's losing his power. And so there is this, kind of duel between Abbas and the Palestinians on the West Bank and Hamas, and they're terrorists and true outright jihadists in the Gaza Strip. Now, in both Gaza and the West Bank, there are moderate Arabs who want to live in peace. There are peace-loving Arabs who want to live in peace. There are Christian Arabs who want to live in peace. And so there are people in both sections who want to live in peace with Israel. It needs to be remembered that in Israel itself, there are nearly 2 million Arabs who are Israeli citizens.
Right.
People forget about that. Some people don't realize that these are people who have taken an oath to live in the land of Israel as Israeli citizens. And the Israelis invited them to stay. They were Palestinian citizens. And when Israel became a nation, they said, we want you to stay. In fact, they begged them in certain places, please stay because we need you to run the government. We don't have enough manpower. And if you leave, we're going to have to build it from scratch. And so in some places, the Arabs and the Druze stayed, and they have done extremely well because Israel is a democracy. And while there are always going to be challenges between peoples, overall, the people inside Israel live in peace.
All right. So tell us the difference between the Hamas random rocket attacks and the Israeli targeted response.
That's a very good point, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. So as I had said earlier, Hamas somehow has gotten all these rockets. Now, they are not cheap. You know, they cry out, we don't have food, and the Israelis are keeping us from humanitarian aid and from the food and everything, which has never been true. Israel has always made sure that the food could get through and humanitarian aid and medicine could get through. But why is it that Hamas can afford all of these rockets? Well, either other nations are giving them these rockets, which is partly true, or they're giving them money and they're using the money to buy the rockets or to build the rockets. And so they've launched 4,000 rockets over the last 2 weeks into Israel indiscriminately. These are not guided by any kind of computers. So they just fall wherever they could fall.
Going back to the collateral damage.
Exactly. And so they don't really care. Remember, this is a terrorist organization with a very low quality or respect for life. For them, the ends justifies the means. And so they don't care who gets killed, who gets maimed. They don't care that a 5-year-old boy gets blown up in front of his mother on the streets of Israel. They don't care. They just send these rockets out and they hope that they will accomplish their political goal as a result of their terrorism. Well, as I pointed out earlier, the Israelis have worked very diligently, both on their own and also in cooperation with the United States government and the United States military, to create what's called an Iron Dome, which are computer-guided missiles that can target these rockets and can blow them up in the air before they ever come down and hit the ground. Here's the problem, John. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, they believe that 90% of the rockets have been shot out of the sky, which is wonderful.
Wow.
But that still means that 10% of 4,000 rockets have landed somewhere in Israel and killed people, maimed people, destroyed property.
Which is 400.
And it causes terror, which is their goal. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens from here. But I want to once again invite people, if you would like to know in detail what happened and how Israel once again became a nation after 2,000 years. I did 4 years of research and writing to write the book that you see behind me right here, called I Am Cyrus, Harry S. Truman and the Rebirth of Israel. I have more than 1,200 endnotes to support the statements that I make in the book. And if you want to know and understand what has happened to bring us to the point where we are, this would be a good starting point. And you could get that book at my website, vonbuseck.com, on Amazon, or wherever books are sold. And if they don't have it in your local Christian bookstore or your local bookstore, please ask them to put it on their shelves so that other people can know that this book is available to give this perspective. Because not only did I want this to be a readable defense of Israel and its rebirth, but I wanted to write it in such a way that it could be read in front of the Supreme Court of the United States to defend Israel, and it would hold that kind of weight.
Very powerful. Wow.
So, John C. Farrell, I have
Yes.
a question for you now.
Yes.
Switching gears in
Okay.
our traditional weekly discussion of the vitally important topic of NASCAR history.
I don't know if vitally important.
Actually, no, you were supposed to have a question for me, right?
Well,
and
no.
This will show how much I know about the vitally important NASCAR history.
Well, I just have a trivia question for you, and I very highly suspect that you have no clue what the answer is,
John,
based on our conversation that we had.
I'm shocked.
So, you
don't think that I will know the answer to your NASCAR? How do you know that I wasn't brushing up on NASCAR book for dummies that you wrote by John C. Farrell?
NASCAR for Dummies.
What's
that
it
was
called?
Written by Mark Martin. This is.
Oh, there it is.
The official NASCAR trivia book.
I like what Kelly Williams Duncan says. We're switching gears.
It says, with 1,001 facts and questions to test your racing knowledge, with an introduction by Marty Smith.
What's the title once again?
The official NASCAR trivia book.
So Dummies is not in that title.
No, There is a book called NASCAR for Dummies.
I got it. You've made that clear every week. So go ahead. What is the trivia question from the official trivia book? The official trivia book.
It has been updated since then, because, as we know, this book was published back in 2012, and they've had a lot of races since then. So for you, the question is, in the history of the NASCAR Premier Series, which is now the Monster Cup NASCAR Energy, Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series, what car number has the most wins in NASCAR's Premier Series? So not the truck or the what was the Nationwide Series. What number? It's a 2-digit number. I'll give you that because you were saying like 182 or something like that earlier today when I brought it up to you. And if anybody in the chat has a guess before I give it.
Yes, before we go into my guess, because it would be a complete guess.
He has no idea.
Oh, is it?
It is not. But in 24, yeah, it's a very good guess, because there were a lot of great drivers who drove the 24.
And 2 times 2 is 4. So.
Oh my. So the answer, I will give you the answer, but I'm going to start off.
No. I got a guess.
Oh,
Are there any other guesses from the audience? We'll give it 3, 2, 1, and 2 smiles. 2 smiles, that doesn't count.
I don't think that's it.
I'm going to guess number 21.
No, not really a good guess either.
Was I close?
No. I will give you
21 or 24. That will determine who gets to go up and spin the wheel.
Probably Kelly's guess is closer.
Hey, what's the number?
Let me get to that. So, just to give you kind of an idea of what we're thinking of, or like the number of wins. So, in third place, with 100 wins each, you have the number 2 car and the number 3 car. Then
those are each 1 digit.
Yeah, 100.
So it's not 23. It's number 2 and number 3.
They were the third place. They're tied for third place for the most wins at 100 apiece. Then you have to go all the way up to 199 wins.
I thought you meant number 199, which was an odd number for a car.
Right. So the number 43 car.
It goes up that high?
The number 43 car. Yeah, it goes up to 99.
99.
And actually, there were cars that were back in the days that had like the car number was like 104 or 103. but that was back in the
But that was the temperature inside the car.
It actually very well could be, because it really got up really hot. So yes, Kelly is right. Richard Petty, out of the 199 wins that the number 43 car, Richard Petty is accountable for 195 of those. There's 4 other drivers that shared the 4 other wins. So 195 wins of those wins.
So that's number 2.
That's number 2.
So who's number 1?
And then you have to go up to number 11, which has 224 wins. But the cool thing that I like to point out is the number 43 car only had 4 drivers. One of them won the majority of them, 195, 199 cars or wins. For the number 11 car, it was driven by 13 drivers.
Whoa!
Or it was driven by 13 drivers that actually won.
All at the same time.
No, not all at the same time.
They keep taking turns.
However, and if you look at the list of drivers who have driven the number 11 car, it's a pretty historic list, because 8 of them are current NASCAR Hall of Fame inductees. They're in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. You have Junior Johnson, who won 11 times. You have Ned Jarrett, who won 49 times. You have Bobby Allison, Buddy Baker, Cale Yarborough, Darrell Waltrip, Terry Labonte, and Bill Elliott. All have had won at least one race, many of them multiple times, in the number 11 car. And it's driven today by, as if you're a NASCAR fan today, it's driven by Denny Hamlin, who himself has 44 wins in the number 11 car. So it's number 11 car with 224 wins. Second place is the number 43 car with 199 wins. And in third place, you have a tie between the number 2 and the number 3 car with 100 wins each.
Okay, so in the last 9 minutes that we have, 8 minutes now that we have in our broadcast, I'm going to switch gears again. And I'm going to ask you, Mr. Sports enthusiast, who used to work for NASCAR.
Yes.
What do you think of the news that came out yesterday? I think it might have been today, that Tim Tebow has been signed as a tight end for the Jacksonville Jaguars and will play for his former coach.
First, I'm going to address what Kelly Williams said. Dale Earnhardt never drove or never won in the number 11 car. Most of his wins were in the number 3 car. The number 2 car is primarily Rusty Wallace and Brad Keselowski. But going back to what you said about Tim Tebow, there was a lot of speculation when he first came out and started playing the NFL that he should have, whichever teams he was playing for, whether it was the Denver Broncos or
New York Jets.
Yeah, New York Jets. I knew it was one of the New York teams.
See, I do know a bit about football, so I can go toe to toe with you on this. I know you know way more than I do, but I do know a bit.
I would say that he should have swallowed a little bit of pride and realized that he was, at least from many of the teams that he had spoken to, he should have swallowed his pride and realized that he was not going to make it in the NFL as a quarterback, and instead suit up and play tight end. And he I don't know if he would be a all-star or Pro Bowler tight end, but he would probably.
We could never know, because he could have been injured. You know.
Yeah,
you just don't know.
He would probably have had a longer career than he has, because I think he's only played in 17 games in his career up to now as a quarterback. And so I think maybe
I would have to say that after the Jets cut him, I thought that was when he should have made the switch, because he gave it the old college try, with the Broncos and with the Jets. But after he was cut, and then no one else would bring him on, and they made it clear that the reason that they didn't bring him on was that he was a college type quarterback, but not a pro type quarterback.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, you have to look at people like Ben Roethlisberger or like Tom Brady.
Roethlisberger.
Well, no, he's from Pittsburgh, so he's Roethlisberger. No, you're right. Roethlisberger or Tom Brady and some others who have had tremendous longevity. So Tim Tebow, as Kelly points out, still may have some gas in the tank. I'm going to make a prediction, John.
Oh, no.
Ready? I'm going to predict that he actually does not make the team, but that they're the guy that they, he'll make the team, but as a backup.
Oh, yeah.
And then there will be an injury. He'll get to play, and he's going to kill it. He's going to kill it, and he'll probably be in until he wants to retire or is injured. Because I think that he is a great athlete, but I think even more importantly than that, he has an amazing heart, and that has a lot to do with success in any sport.
Right, but you have to. I agree. He'll probably make the team, if nothing else. It's for the
Here's
Jacksonville
the cynic.
Jaguars.
Wait, cynic alert! Cynic alert! Go ahead.
No,
To sell
tickets. It's for Jacksonville Jaguars, which really there's a reason that they had the number 1 pick in this year's NFL draft. But he's
right. That's how the NFL works. The worst team gets the first pick. Right,
which just goes to show that they need something to ignite the fan base. Yes, granted, they got Trevor Lawrence, who is going to be, I think, will be a great quarterback for years to come, as long as he doesn't get injured. And
he can't cut his hair because it's like Samson.
Right. I honestly think, I pray that he does well, and I hope he has a great career. But you've got to look at the fact that last time he played organized football was 9 years ago. He's now almost in his mid-30s and hasn't played football. He's played AAA or AA baseball, but he hasn't been on the gridiron in a competitive game like that since 2012. And I think if it had been like 2 or 3 years, yeah, I was like, okay, yeah, I'll give him a shot. That's a pretty long time.
Okay, so we are both on record, and we'll see which one is correct at the end of the season.
Oh, I don't think he'll stay on the team. I think if the guy in front of him at the starting tight end gets injured, I think they'll bring someone in to provide competition. And he'll get playing time, like in garbage time or trash time.
What a cynic! Oh my gosh, they said the same thing about another Heisman Trophy winner named Jim Plunkett, and he's got a Super Bowl ring on his finger. So I've seen this before.
He has a Super Bowl ring despite him.
Despite him, he was the quarterback that won the game. So I think, wasn't he MVP as well? I think he was. We'll have to look. We'll answer that question next week. But we got to wrap up. So thank you, everyone, again for joining us for Stories and Myths. We just want to remind you, if you have a question from history or a story that you would like us to investigate and to talk about during the show, please go to my website, vonbuseck.com. You see my name down below, right there, vonbuseck.com. And over there, John, over there. Oh. Yeah. Go to vonbuseck.com with no space and just go to the contact button and send me an email. And we'd be glad to do some research on your topic and talk a little bit about it. And I think that would be wonderful and fun. And a reminder of, I have an announcement, John.
Oh, you do?
Yes. Next week's program will be the book release party for my new book called Forward, The Leadership Principles of Ulysses S. Grant, which is the follow-up book to that one right there. It's hard to do that backwards, but that one right there, which is Victor, the final battle of Ulysses S. Grant. So this one right there is a biography about the last 2 years in the life of Grant. And then my publisher said, oh, yay, Kelly pre-ordered her book yesterday. So yes, feel free to go onto Amazon or to go to grantforwardbook.com to order the forward book. But my publisher had asked if I would write a companion book about Grant's leadership principles. And so I did, and it comes out next week, May 25th. So a week from now, we will have the book launch party as part of Stories and Myths. So for John C. Farrell and myself, Craig von Buseck, we're so glad that you've been with us. Thank you. And tell your friends about the show. Oh, and also, if you've read Victor, I ask that you would go on to Amazon and give it a review. The more reviews that I receive, the higher it goes in Amazon, showing it to other people. So if you've read Victor, and when you read forward, please do me a favor and go on to Amazon and give it a review if you would. All right, so have a wonderful night, and we'll see you what, John? Same bat time,
same bat channel.
See you guys.
I think that's copyrighted. We probably should stop saying that.
I don't think it is.
Okay.
So anyway, have a good night, all.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.